Welcome everybody to session 7 of the Carer Rights and Complaints Network Know Your Rights webinar series. And this session today is on employment and carers. What are your rights, or carers' rights at work? So some of you may have attended our other sessions in this series on different elements of carers' rights and complaints, usually in service settings. The one today is around when carers are employed in the workforce and what rights and entitlements come up in that setting. My name is Sarah Judd-Lamb. I'm the Executive Manager of Policy Research and Projects at Carers New South Wales. And joining me today is our colleague at the Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, I should say, Claire Williams, and also my colleague Grace, who is helping to manage the slides today. We want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting on today. As many, if not most of us, are probably at home and working from home today. If those of us that are delivering the webinar, we're probably representing lots of different traditional lands. So I know for myself, I'm on the Wallamedigal land in Epping, and I want to extend my respects to elders past, present and emerging for all the lands represented today and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So most of you will probably be aware of Carers New South Wales. I won't go through that in detail, but we are the peak non-government organisation for family and friend carers in New South Wales. And these webinars are delivered in partnership with members of our Carer Rights and Complaints Network, one of whom is presenting today. Briefly, we just like to go over the definition of carers in this context, especially because we're talking about employment and it can get very confusing on whether we're talking about paid care workers or family and friend carers. So just to clarify today, when we talk about carers at Carers New South Wales, we're speaking about family members and friends. So people that are providing care and support to a family member or friend with care needs, as you can see listed on that slide. We are not talking about paid care workers or those other types of groups that might be referred to as carers. And so when we're talking about employment and carers today, we're talking about family and friend carers that may balance their caring role with paid employment in any context. So some family and friend carers are employed as paid care workers, but many are employed in lots of different sectors. So that's just to clarify who we're talking about today. So I'm doing that introduction, as you can see there, and then we'll have Claire Williams presenting shortly on Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. And then we'll have some questions and discussion and wrap up with a bit more information about the series. And so before I introduce Claire formally, just a reminder that we're recording the session today, and just to please keep your microphone on mute and to keep your video off. Our session today is number 7 of this series. You can access any of the recordings of the prior sessions that might interest you on the Carers New South Wales YouTube page. We'll also be sharing the recording of today's session with everybody that is registered, and that will eventually go up onto our YouTube as well. And then you may also be interested in session 8 next month on finances. And we will also send you the link to our website where you can register for that if you haven't already. Fantastic. So I will now introduce Claire Williams, who has worked with us closely on our Rights and Complaints project for carers in the last couple of years. And Claire is from Anti-Discrimination New South Wales and is going to be speaking about carers' rights and entitlements in the workplace in the context of discrimination. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Grace. I'm just going to have a chat to you today about Anti-Discrimination New South Wales and our services. Some of you might be familiar with the name Anti-Discrimination Board of New South Wales. Quite recently, we changed our name to make it easier for people to understand who we are, because obviously people associate boards with a company, and we're a state government department. So we are Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. Next slide, thanks. We're just going to have a chat today about discrimination laws, federal and state laws, because it is confusing for people and there is some duplication in the law. We're going to have a look at types of unlawful discrimination, particularly carers discrimination, and a little bit about disability discrimination as well. And most importantly, you can go away with the knowledge of how to make a complaint or an inquiry about discrimination. So in Australia, every state and territory has its own anti-discrimination laws, its own act, and its own organisation or body that administers administers it. So obviously in New South Wales, it's Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, and we cover the Anti-Discrimination Act that was written in 1977. But you can see there that there are a number of other uh, uh, laws which are covered by other states and territories. What that means in particular is that if something happens to you in New South Wales, you can make an inquiry or a complaint to our service, New South Wales Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. But if you're in another state, you would have to go to that equivalent body. So on top of that, there's also some federal laws. These are national laws that are administered by the Australian Human Rights Commission. So the Australian Human Rights Commission administers the Australian Human Rights Act, the Racial Discrimination Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, and the Age Discrimination Act. So that body administers all of those acts as well. So just in particular of care, in the particular discussion of carers discrimination, the Australian Human Rights Commission covers carers discrimination under the Sex Discrimination Act. So I'm talking about the federal body, I'm not talking about my organisation. So under the Sex Discrimination Act, it's against the law for employers to directly discriminate against a person because of their responsibilities to care for a family member. So these can include caring for young children or adults with disabilities, mental illness, chronic illness, and for older people. So many employees will have caring responsibilities at different times in their lives, and employers have an obligation to avoid discrimination against carers in some circumstances. So under the Disability Discrimination Act as well, it's against the law to discriminate against a person because of their association with a person with a disability, a carer. So it's good practice for organisations to develop strategies to support employees with caring responsibilities. So that's a little bit about the Australian Human Rights Commission. I'm just going to mention with the next slide, please, another organisation who may be useful to know about, and that's Fair Work, the Fair Work Ombudsman and the Fair Work Commission. Now, there's an act called the Fair Work Act, which was written in 2009, and it provides for the minimum employment standards and regulates on a range of employment and industrial matters. So there's two organisations, the Fair Work Ombudsman, who you can make complaints to about unfair treatment. It's an independent statutory agency of the Government of Australia that serves as a central point of contact for free advice and information on the Australian National Workplace Relations System. Some of you might be aware of an organisation called the Fair Work Commission. Now, the Fair Work Commission used to be known as Fair Work Australia, and it deals with industrial relations matters. So some of you might see on the news information about the minimum wage has been increased or something like that. The Fair Work Commission organises all of those sorts of things, all of that legislation. But the Ombudsman themselves is the agency that you can make a complaint about things like unfair dismissal. So back to us as an organisation. So we're Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, as I mentioned, and we cover New South Wales itself. What do we do as an organisation? Well, we answer inquiries about discrimination, and I'm going to provide you with how to contact us with telephone lines and websites and so forth at the end of this discussion. We handle complaints of discrimination, and I'll explain how we do that. We also raise awareness about discrimination and its impacts, and we love hearing from the community in sessions like this in terms of what is affecting them and how we can assist. We manage applications for exemptions from the Act of Discrimination. I'll explain what that is a little bit later. And we advise the government about discrimination issues. Next slide, thanks. So under the Anti-Discrimination Act, what is discrimination? So discrimination is treating somebody unfairly because of a characteristic they have or they're assumed to have that is protected under New South Wales law. Let's have a look at the next slide in terms of what some of those might be. But first, we just need to have a look at the definition of indirect discrimination. So I just described to you direct discrimination, treating someone unfairly because of who they are, but there's something called indirect discrimination as well. And indirect discrimination is when a rule or requirement is the same for everyone, but it unfairly affects people who have responsibilities as a carer, and it's not reasonable in those circumstances. Indirect discrimination might affect people other than carers, but we're talking in the context of carers today. The types of discrimination that Anti-Discrimination New South Wales covers are called grounds. And here's the list of the types of discrimination that we cover. So we include disability, sex, race, age, marital or domestic status, homosexuality, transgender status, carers' responsibilities, and also we cover sexual harassment as well. Sex discrimination also does cover pregnancy and breastfeeding as well. So I just want to give you the definition of disability discrimination, because that's when someone's discriminated against unfairly because of their physical disability, their physical illness or disease, their mental or psychiatric illness, their intellectual disability, learning difficulty, disfigurement, or Hep C or HIV status. Now, disability may, the illness that somebody have, the physical illness someone has may be temporary, for example, COVID-19, or it may be a permanent disease or a temporary illness. So under New South Wales anti-discrimination legislation, carers' responsibilities are covered. And what that means is it's unlawful to be treated unfairly because of your responsibilities as a carer at work. Now, under our legislation, carers' responsibilities are only covered at your workplace, so in employment or in getting a job. So the law supports people who care or support a child, a stepchild, an adopted or foster child, a child or adult for whom you're guardian, or a family member, such as the examples below. Carers' discrimination is against the law in workplaces, employment agencies such as recruitment companies, industrial organisations such as a membership of a union, and qualifying bodies. For example, a society, for example, a society that you're connected to because of your qualification. So anti-discrimination law covers a number of areas in general. So I'm not talking about carers' responsibilities, which I just mentioned under our legislation was only covered in the areas that I just mentioned, but all the other grounds, all the other types of discrimination, for example, disability, are covered in employment, at work, or when you're trying to get a job. Goods and services in shops, banks, using government services, cafes or hospitals, in public education, so public schools, TAFE, university, in seeking accommodation or whilst you are in rental accommodation, at registered clubs, any club that sells alcohol or has gambling machines. So best practice in terms of people who have carers' responsibilities is, here's an example. There's an employer who wishes to support an employee who has primary care for a child with a disability. The employer does this by providing information and resources on the organisation's policies and the services available in the community, and the employer may also provide flexible work arrangements, which allow the employee to provide from home and to work part-time. Now you can see there the word may, so it's up to the employer to be fair and negotiate fairly with you in terms of your carer's responsibilities. Sometimes an employer may say no, but they must be fair in their negotiations. So for example, not dismissing you because you or firing you because you have carer's responsibilities, or not be not willing to negotiate. We just want to touch quickly on COVID-19, because obviously we're in lockdown in New South Wales. So some examples of discrimination that we're experiencing at the moment is people's employment are being terminated because they have COVID-19, or someone in their family has COVID-19. That would be unlawful. that the employer downsizes because of COVID-19, and with changes being rolled in your workplace, you're treated differently because you're pregnant or your responsibilities as a carer. So you're targeted because of that, that would be unlawful. Or your rental agreement is terminated because you're a doctor, nurse, or health worker, and the landlord is worried that you'll be infected with COVID-19 and will contaminate the property. Now, also, I just want to say in terms of that slide, we're also getting a lot of inquiries regarding wearing masks. Now, obviously, the government policy about wearing masks is a federal government policy which is being administered now by the states in terms of vaccinations and masks. There are government measures which are there to protect your health and they're legitimate. However, we do realise some people have exceptions, and that may be because of their disability that they're unable to wear a mask. And we are aware of that. And so if you feel that you've been treated unfairly because you're either asked to have a vaccination or you're asked to wear a mask and you're unable to do it because of your disability, then you are able to contact us and talk to us and make a complaint. Making a formal complaint of discrimination. So we handle complaints of discrimination covered by the Act. And if you can complain to us, we can help you and the other party, that's who you're complaining about, find a way to resolve the matter according to the law. Complaints must be made in writing. Now, that's a legal term. So what we mean by that is, and I'll explain later, is you can obviously email us complaints or fill out complaint forms digitally. But you can lodge your complaint in any language. If you have any questions about the complaint process, we really advise you to contact our inquiry service before making your complaint. So we resolve things by using a method called conciliation. So conciliation is an opportunity for both parties, yourself who's making the complaint and the other agency that you're complaining about, to come together. Now, when we say that, it's not the bully. If you're being bullied or harassed at work because of, for example, your carer's responsibilities, we wouldn't ask you to come together with the individual. We would actually ask we negotiate with the HR department. So in terms of coming together, we're neutral. We act as a neutral agency, and we're trying to find the best resolution that's possible. Normally, outside of COVID, conciliation is a private face-to-face meeting where both parties get to have their say and have some control over how the complaint is resolved. However, because of COVID-19, we're using MS Teams, we're using telephone shuttling. Previously, we would do face-to-face meetings in Parramatta, and we would do outreach conciliations as well. In saying we use conciliation conferences, this is a free service that we provide to you, and it's of no cost, and you don't need a solicitor to use our service either. Our conciliation officers are impartial and don't take sides. And when you ring our inquiry service, we're also impartial, but we are able to refer you to other services. So the possible outcomes that you might ask for in terms of making a complaint about discrimination, there's various outcomes. Maybe it's an apology or a statement of regret from the organisation that you're making the complaint about. Maybe a job reinstated, a transfer or promotion. Perhaps compensation, financial compensation. In saying that, we don't pay the compensation, the organisation that you're making the complaint about does. Access to a previously denied job or opportunity or service, perhaps workplace education and job training about discrimination laws, and maybe a change in policy for the organisation that you're making the complaint about. So now we're going to have a step-by-step discussion about what you can do if you've been treated unfairly. Because when you go away today, the most important thing that we want you to understand is how you can make an inquiry or a complaint to our service and how we can assist you, and also be aware that we can refer you to other services if your complaint doesn't fit within our legislation. So you can phone Anti-Discrimination New South Wales and make a confidential inquiry. So once you ring in our inquiry line, you don't have to reveal your name or who you are, and you're able to have a discussion with an inquiry officer. At the moment, because of COVID-19, your call will be recorded when you ring our inquiry service, but an inquiry officer will return your call that day if you're ringing between Monday to Friday. It's a confidential, free and impartial service, and we're happy to respond to your inquiries and give you the advice that you require. Community workers can represent individuals and make a complaint on behalf of them. So, for example, or family members as well. The only issue there is the person has to agree. So you as a carer can make a complaint of, for example, disability discrimination against an organisation. So you could make a complaint on behalf of somebody else, but that person has to give you permission to do so. As community workers, you can also lodge a complaint on behalf of someone else, and you can also assist in that process as well. So the other party that you're complaining about does have to know who you are if there's a formal complaint made. So again, when you ring the inquiry service, your call is confidential. If you decide to make a formal complaint to us in writing, whether it's digitally or in writing, then we have to let the other party know that you've made a complaint. So you can send us your complaint in email or writing. So we have complaint forms, which I'll give you information about our website. So you can download a complaint form and fill it in online. You can print it off and fill that in. You can send us an email. You can send us a letter. Your complaint forms must be complaint forms can be posted to you or filled in online, as I mentioned. Complaints can be made in any language, in Braille or recorded on an audio cassette. And please ensure that when you're making a complaint to us, we don't know who you are, we don't understand your experiences or what's happened to you. So please include as much information as you can. So when I say include as much information as you can, that should be the contact details of the person or the organisation you're complaining about. The witnesses, if there were witnesses, there mightn't have necessarily be witnesses, times, dates, full names of people involved, and how you would like the complaint to be resolved. Now, in saying that, we really advise people if you're being treated badly, if you're being discriminated against, we advise people to keep a diary or keep notes about what's happening so that you're able to keep as much information as possible. Obviously, you might know the name of the person. For example, if you were discriminated against in a shop, therefore, we would just ask for a description of what time, round about what time that was, what the shop name was, what the person looked like. As mentioned before, once you make a complaint to us, a respondent, who's the person that you're complaining about, they're entitled to reply to the complaint. So again, a conciliation conference would be organised once we accept your complaint and we get both parties to respond to the questions that we ask. And this is a free service provided by Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, but we remain neutral and attempt to resolve the matter as the best outcome for both parties. On average, from start to finish, once you send us your complaint, a complaint process will take about 4 months. During COVID, we are overwhelmed by complaints, and particularly a lot of complaints about mask wearing and vaccinations and so forth. But complaints are processed generally in order unless they're urgent. It's important to say that also there's a 12-month window to make a complaint to Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. So if something has happened to you in the last 12 months, you're able to make a complaint to us. However, it's also important to say, if you didn't know who Anti-Discrimination New South Wales was, or you were too anxious to make a complaint and it was more than 12 months ago, please still make a complaint to our organisation and explain why it's taken longer than 12 months to do so. And we will review the complaint, and a lot of complaints that are longer than 12 months are accepted as well for those reasons. Now, a lot of people we find are happy to ring the inquiry service and sometimes happy to make a complaint, but sometimes people would like a confidential way of letting us know something's happening in the community. And particularly during COVID-19, we found this has been useful for people just to let us know what's happening through our community incident survey. So we do collect information about incidents of discrimination so that we can be aware of emerging issues, and we don't disclose your identity, and we won't contact you unless you ask to be. So if you can see there, we've got surveymonkey.com/r/AD New South Wales dash let us know. So a lot of people who feel hesitant to make a complaint because they're stressed or they're anxious about making a complaint, or they're concerned about something that's happening. But for example, if you see something happening and you're not it affects someone who's a carer or someone who has a disability or someone who is of, or for example, race discrimination, but it's not personally affecting you, you can still let us know about that, what's going on. So what happens if your complaint isn't resolved at conciliation? So once you go through inquiries and the conciliation process, um, the your complaint can go to the next level, which is a tribunal called the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, which is called NCAT. So you can request the President of Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. Annabel Bennett is our current president, and the president is like our top CEO of our organisation, and they can ask for that to go to the next level. So NCAT is like a court. Its hearings are public, and its decisions are legally binding, and so therefore they're no longer confidential. When you make a complaint to Anti-Discrimination New South Wales and it's conciliated, the results of that are all confidential. If you decide to go to the tribunal is not connected to Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, and that becomes public. So that means newspapers, for example, could pick that up. It's not a confidential complaint anymore. Solicitors are normally used, but you can represent yourself. But then if you do use a solicitor, you would need to pay for your own legal costs. If you decide to go to NCAT and you can't afford legal costs, we can refer you to organisations such as Legal Aid or community legal centres who may be able to find a pro bono solicitor to assist you. Just very excited to let you know about our new website. Our website, like many things, hadn't been revamped for some time, and we've been able to recently revamp it with our great publications team at the moment, and we've changed the website, the link to the website. However, if you use the old link, it'll still go to the same place. So it's antidiscrimination.newsouthwales.gov.au. And if you go on there, there's that's the first what you'll see when you click on that, and it'll say make a complaint, and make it very easy for you to make a complaint by looking at the website. We understand sometimes people don't have access to digital information, and we're more than happy to print it off and send it to you, post it to you as well. Further down that page, there's a number of slides which will have each area that we cover, the grounds that we cover, so and the areas as well. So there'll be things like race discrimination. You can learn more about race, disability. We also have some easy read guides. We have some fantastic videos. We have Auslan, and we have multilingual resources. So we have stuff in many languages on that new website. So it's really, really easy, and we'd love your community feedback if you'd like to make comments about that site as well. So just giving you some contact information in terms of if you need to make an inquiry to our service, then you're able to ring the number 9268 5544. We also have a toll-free number, which is 1800 670 812. Now, if you need to make a complaint in your own language, then we'd advise you to ring the translation service, which is the TIS service, on 131 450, and they will then organise to call us with an interpreter. You can email us a general inquiry at adbcontact@justice.newsouthwales.gov.au. I've also put down my personal information there because if you require any community information sessions, like the one you see today, I'm more than happy to come and do one for you. Or if you require any further information, feel more than happy to give me a call or to email me there. In terms of making a complaint, if you would like to email us to make a complaint, as I mentioned before, you can download that complaints form, or you can just email us some information at complaintsadb@justice.newsouthwales.gov.au. I've just shown you that fantastic new website, which hopefully is easy to navigate, and you could have a look at that after the session. I'll be sending all the links to all of these things. I think you're going to be able to access a copy of this presentation and also links to our website. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn and keep up with all the information in terms of what we're up to.
So thank you so much, Claire, for that presentation. And I hope, I know I've had a couple come in since you were presenting, so hopefully people have picked up some really useful information from that. And oh, we've got some claps there. And yeah, just to reiterate, that new website of Anti-Discrimination New South Wales is great. Lots of good resources that are worth checking out. And one of the key aims of this series of webinars is to sort of show you the faces behind the names. It's sort of our fact sheets, and really just to introduce carers to these organisations that can assist with information and complaints, to sort of take some of the, I don't know, fear or uncertainty away of going through those processes. And so just to really encourage carers that if you have a query or a concern about discrimination, even if you're not sure what quite to do with it, Anti-Discrimination New South Wales is a really great contact and can really help you sort through that and work out where it fits and to what extent it's an issue. So thanks so much, Claire, for presenting. And
Pleasure.
Also for adding in the COVID information, because that's obviously very relevant at the moment. And I will touch on a bit later if there's questions about it, some of that Fair Work stuff that you mentioned, because we're seeking to have a presenter on that side today, which we weren't able to get. But just a plug as well that there is a fact sheet on this topic that the webinar is based on, which we will send you the link to, and which I've put the link in the chat to as well. So all of the information covered today is summarised in that fact sheet. And so we might move now to questions. So I haven't got any additional questions in the chat as yet, but if you do have questions that you want to put in the chat at this time, please feel free. And we will start on the pre-submitted questions that we were provided with in the registration process. So we had 3 pre-submitted questions, and this may or may not have been covered in aspects of your presentation, Claire, but we'll go through them anyway, just so it's clear.
Sure.
The first question was, up to how many hours can you work and care for someone?
That's really absolutely up to you as an individual in terms of, you're obviously able to work and care for people in terms of what you're able to do as an individual. So there's no specific, in terms of our legislation, we don't cover specific hours and so forth.
And so where that might come in, yeah, and so where that might come in, I think, and I'm not sure if this is where the question is coming, if the person that asked that's here and wants to clarify, that's fine. But I know that when it comes to some things like around income support, if you're on carer payment, and if you're wondering maybe around whether there's a certain number of hours that you can do paid work before you're no longer entitled to that payment, that's kind of a separate question. And we did have the webinar session that we did last month was focused on Centrelink questions. So it's probably best to look at that recording and that fact sheet as a starting point if your question is around income support, because there are some rules around when you may or may not be eligible to receive carer payment in relation to paid work. And yep, JC's posted there that there's a 25-hour rule that applies there. So that's specifically around income support eligibility, but that's not a general rule that would apply in any other setting. And similarly, I guess where it may come in is if with your specific employer, if you're looking at negotiating flexible workplace arrangements, or you're looking at how many hours you're able to do paid work as well as care, that's something that's on a more individual basis, and that is something that may be worth looking at the Fair Work Ombudsman resources to find out what your rights are in terms of requesting flexible working arrangements. So there's no hard and fast rule there either, but it may depend on the job, may depend on what your caring role requires. But as Claire has said, from a discrimination point of view or from a definition point of view as to what makes you a carer or not, there's no limit of hours. So hopefully that kind of addresses the question. Were there any supplementary questions on that theme that anyone wanted to ask? Okay, we'll go to the second pre-submitted question then, which was, and this one maybe more for us than for Claire, but how can paid work be balanced with caring roles? So I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to say on that, Claire, or just wanted me to respond.
I'll let you respond to that, yeah.
No worries. It's kind of it's a hypothetical question, isn't it? I mean, how can care be balanced with paid work? And look, it's something that Carers New South Wales looks at a lot, and we know that it's a challenge, and it really depends on the caring role and the job. And there's a lot of different ways to look at that. So I suppose there's no easy answer. But I guess some key things to note are that, number one, there are some rights and entitlements that you have as a carer if you're going to be in the paid workforce. And so there's some protections there, and that's where and discrimination information is important, and also Fair Work Ombudsman. And I actually will post the Fair Work Ombudsman website in the chat so that you can visit that. But Fair Work Ombudsman has some great resources on basic entitlements for employees, and also carers leave entitlements, and how you can access the right to request flexible work. I'll also repost the link I posted earlier in case some of our people that have joined more recently didn't see that. But the second web address that I'm posting there is for the page on our website for this project. And if you find the fact sheets there, fact sheet 7, which is related to today's webinar, has a summary of those carers leave entitlements and also the right to request flexible work. So one way that you can balance work and care is by being aware of what rights and entitlements you have to do that effectively in your workplace. Another way that you can do it is to access the right formal services if you need, or informal supports from family and friends to free you up to enable you to do that work. And we know that that's a really common barrier, that not everybody has access to those arrangements to give them the time or headspace to be able to work. But there are systems available that can potentially offer that. And so those things are really worth exploring. And then the third piece, I suppose, is looking at sort of programs that exist to support carers with work. So we're delivering one project called Care to Work, which assists carers that are looking to get into the workplace or progress their career to kind of overcome some of the individual barriers to that. And that's one way that carers can kind of look at addressing some of those challenges in work. We also have a program called Carers and Employers that looks at actually working with employers to improve flexibility of the workplace. And that's an area where there's quite a lot of work going on at the moment. So finding an employer that is flexible and that is really open to carers and understands the importance of balancing the caring role is another way. So they're just some ideas, but we're very aware of the challenges, and happy for you to contact us if you have particular experiences that you want to report or questions about those programs. And I can just see that there is an additional question here. Yes, so I think that actually might have been the third question. So I'm not sure if the question that's just asked was the same person that asked the third pre-submitted question, but it's a good segue in any case. And so the question in the chat, if you're not able to see it, is that working carers employed by New South Wales Health, what relation does that have to the Fair Work Act, and what rights and support services are available to these working carers? So great segue there, Carla. So the third pre-submitted question was on that as well. And so really I spoke about some different ways that carers in general can balance work and care. One thing that we haven't covered yet today is that for carers that work in the New South Wales public sector, there's actually some additional kind of principles that support balancing work and care. And so that doesn't apply outside the public sector at the moment, but if you work for New South Wales Health or for another New South Wales government department, then you can actually look at the New South Wales Carers Recognition Act, which is it's a piece of legislation that exists in New South Wales. There's a similar one that exists at a national level, and there are principles in that legislation that really are to support public employers, those government departments and agencies, to be particularly aware of carers' needs and to be flexible around them balancing work and care. So it's not to say that it always happens perfectly or better within the government sector, but it does mean that if you're having challenges balancing work and care in the public sector, you have a little bit more kind of ground to negotiate that. And so I guess without going into too much detail, I'll just copy and paste for you again into the link, into the chat there, the page of our website that talks about that legislation, so you can explore that further. Unfortunately, the Carers Recognition Act, one reason we don't speak about it a lot in this context, well, one reason is that it applies to the public sector only, and the other part is that it's not got as a very clear, strong pathway to necessarily follow that up in the same way that discrimination and fair work entitlements. It's a bit of a different pathway, but certainly any carers out there that are working for government, state or federal, have a look at care recognition legislation. You might be surprised at some of the obligations that your employer has specifically with regard to carers. Did you want to add anything on that, Claire?
No, I thought you summarised that perfectly. Yeah.
Great. So that's the pre-submitted questions. Did anyone want to ask any additional live questions? I did notice that when we promoted the new Anti-Discrimination New South Wales website, Claire, we got a question, which I thought I might throw into the mix.
Fantastic.
So just to surprise you with this one, it's not too controversial, hopefully. But the question kind of addressed, why is it that carers discrimination is only against the law in certain contexts that particularly work?
That's a great question. And obviously, the law was written in 1977, but the carers was only added in around 2001. So it's a newer part of the Anti-Discrimination Act. And we recognise that the Act isn't perfect. We though administer the law, and it's the government that makes changes to the legislation. So all the state acts are regulated and changed, and we have made changes over since 1977 to ours, but obviously there are gaps, and if that's something that is of concern, we strongly suggest that you contact our organisation and we'll pass those concerns on to our president, who can pass it therefore on to the Attorney General and so forth, and then therefore it will go to state parliament in order for changes to be made. I know that sounds a bit complicated, but unfortunately we don't write the Act, and we haven't written the laws, but there are gaps in the legislation, and we do recognise that.
Thanks for that, Claire. And yeah, I guess just to kind of come back to the focus of these webinars and the fact sheets that are associated with them, one thing that we realised as Carers New South Wales, in partnership with the New South Wales government when starting this whole project, was that carers do have a lot of rights here and there. They're not holistic, and it's not an easy one place, one-stop shop that you could go to have your rights upheld, and there are some gaps. What we wanted to do with this project is to bring all that information together, simplify it as much as possible, and focus on the areas that you're most likely to get traction, basically, because there's some areas where maybe there's not really clear rights, or there's not really clear legal avenues or complaints avenues to get things addressed, and that's a gap that needs to be addressed, and that Carers New South Wales and others can advocate for at a systemic level. But we also want to make sure that carers are aware of the opportunities that do exist, where there's really firm complaints avenues and very clear legal rights. And so that's one reason why in this webinar today, we have a real focus on discrimination, because we know that there's really clear rights. We know that there's really great resources and support. And so if you have an issue in the workplace in this area, it's something that we'd really encourage carers to pursue. And in the other areas where there's maybe less concrete pathways, there's ways that you can self-advocate. But yeah, our aim is to really try and connect carers with those existing opportunities that we know are effective. And similarly with Fair Work Ombudsman, so as Claire was saying before, and as I referred to, if you do have issues in the workplace setting around leave entitlements and negotiation with managers and those kinds of industrial scenarios, there are also firm pathways and resources around those rights. And we haven't spoken to those in detail today, but again, I have posted that in the chat, the Fair Work website, and also the website for the Rights and Complaints Project, where you can find the fact sheet that is associated with today. And that has a really clear summary, we hope, of carers' leave entitlements, paid and unpaid, and the right to request flexible work. And then that will give you the starting point from which, if you want to dig into that further, you can find further resources and look at that complaints pathway. Were there any other questions arising? To have a look at a couple of the ones that had come up in our prior conversations as well that might be interested. So just another one for you, Claire, that might be straightforward to answer. Can an employer refuse to employ me, a person, based on my caring responsibilities?
So that's an interesting question. So obviously, there in terms of a job description, there's the essential requirements of the job. So therefore, if an employer is employing you and is upfront, and it is in the job description, and they have said things as, for example, let's say time coverage. Just say you have, because of your carer's responsibilities, you need to pick up a child at school, for example, or at care at a certain time. And just say your pickup time is 3:30, but part of the essential requirements of the job, let's just say it's at a bank, and the shifts are, say, 2 in the afternoon till 5 in the afternoon, then they have the right to say that you don't fulfill the essential requirements of the job within that. So if you're saying in a job interview, I'm not available from this time to this time, and they say, well, part of the essential requirements of the job are that you have to be available, then they do have the right to say, look, you're not. We don't think you're the best applicant for the job. In saying that, it's worth being negotiating and being flexible and saying, for example, I'd be a great employee. I'm happy to do any other shifts. You may be able to get a job doing another shift and so forth. And we do, as the law says, it's important to be able to negotiate. The employer has to be fair in negotiating. So it's not a blank yes or no question, really. Yes or no. An employer is able to say these are the essential requirements, and sorry, you're not able to work those times, so therefore you're not the best applicant for the job. However, if you are working in a position, for example, if you have been working in a position for some time and you now have particular carer's responsibilities, for example, just say your partner is sick, or your grandparent is sick, and you've always been working certain times and certain hours, then the employer should be flexible in negotiating with you. For example, needing to finish at 3:30 to take your grandmother to hospital. Yes, so an employer should be flexible flexible and approachable in negotiating with you regarding that. They are able to say no, it doesn't fit the workplace, but they should be fair in doing so. We do receive a number of complaints from people whose employer said no, just simply no, and wouldn't negotiate, or they were dismissed. They lost their jobs because without any discussion, and that would be unlawful.
Thanks for that, Claire. And we had a few other sort of potential scenarios to discuss, but I think probably they're mainly summarised in the concept of, if you have a query about something that could be discrimination, they can call Discrimination New South Wales. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. They can call, and an inquiry officer will be in contact with them Monday to Friday, where from 9 to 5 we answer calls. And yeah, an inquiry officer will ring you back and have a chat to you, because obviously we're all working from home at the moment because of COVID, and have a chat to you about whether it fits within the legislation. And if it doesn't, we'll advise you where you can go. We'll refer you onwards.
Thanks so much for that. So yeah, just want to echo that encouragement to everybody. We've heard some great follow-up and outcomes come out of that process. It's definitely a readily available resource to carers that are not sure whether what they're experiencing might be discrimination. And as we just wrap up today's session, I think there might still be a couple of slides in the slide deck, Grace, is that right? Just with yes, fantastic. So I've been mentioning this project, the Know Your Rights project, and I've posted the link in the chat, but that's the link to where the information about this project is. the link to the recordings is, and also the fact sheets are. So the one pictured there is a different one, but today's webinar 7 corresponds with fact sheet 7 on work. And all of these fact sheets are brief 2-page overviews with key links and phone numbers designed to be as simple as possible for carers. Some of the areas covered are complex, so we've done our best to simplify, but we really know how just many different systems carers have to navigate. So we really encourage you to have a look at those fact sheets, and particularly today's fact sheet as for a summary of the key information covered. And then our next slide, I think, is about the next, oh, no, we did cover the webinars earlier, but we've been doing these webinars monthly. We have 8 in total planned, and our final and 8th webinar will happen in the middle of next month, and that is focused on challenges with finances. So I mentioned that last month we did Centrelink, which is finance related, but looking at all kinds of payments, rights and complaints around payments. So that won't be covered next month, but is available in the recording on our YouTube channel. Today was obviously about employment, which relates to finances to some extent as well. But next month's session will mainly look at things that are available in terms of rebates and concessions, but also things like where you can go if you have issues with payments or hardship or challenges around insurance and things like that. So that's the areas that are left to cover. And if you want a taste for what will be covered there, have a look at the fact sheets number 8. Because that's the scope of that webinar as well. We will be sending you around some of those key links after today's session, and also an evaluation form. We'd love your feedback, and the website where you can register for additional sessions. So I think that's pretty much everything for today. And for once, we're actually finishing before scheduled time. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining and for your Q&A. And we hope that this was helpful for you today, and stay safe.